In either case, there was no need for refrigeration. The happy Colombianos were chewing and swallowing some of that poor cow's meat when they were blown to bits by the latest advance in the evolution of high explosives, which was called dagonite. Dagonite was the son, so to speak, of a considerably weaker explosive made by the same company and called Glaco. Glaco begat dagonite, so to speak, and both were descendants of Greek fire and gunpowder and dynamite and cordite and TNT. So it might be said that the Colombianos had treated the cow abominably, but that retribution had been swift and terrible, thanks largely to the big-brained inventors of dagonite. In view of how badly the Colombianos had treated the cow, Major Ricardo Cortez, flying faster than sound, might be seen as a virtuous knight as in days of yore, and he felt that way about himself too, although he knew nothing about the cow or what his rocket had hit. He radioed back to his superiors that the Bahia de Darwin was destroyed. He asked that his best friend, Lieutenant Colonel Reyes, who was back on the ground and who had turned a rocket loose on the airport that afternoon, be given this message in Spanish. It is true. Reyes would understand that he was agreeing that letting the rocket go had been as elating as sexual intercourse, and he would never find out that he had not hit the Bahia de Darwin, and the friends and relatives of the Colombianos who were blown to Hamburg in the estuary would never learn what became of them. The rocket which hit the airport was surely a lot more effective in Darwinian terms than the one that hit the San Mateo. It killed thousands of people and birds and dogs and cats and rats and mice and so on, who would otherwise have reproduced their own kind. The blast in the marsh killed only the 14 crewmen and about 500 rats on the ship, and a few hundred birds and some crabs and fish and so on. Mainly, though, it was an ineffectual assault on the very bottom of the food chain, the billions upon billions of microorganisms who, along with their own excrement and the corpses of their ancestors, comprised the muck of the marsh. The explosion didn't bother them much, since they weren't all that sensitive to sudden starts and stops. They could never have committed suicide in the manner as Siegfried von Kleist at the wheel of the bus intended to commit suicide with a sudden stop. They were simply moved suddenly from one neighborhood to another one. They flew through the air, bringing a lot of the old neighborhood with them, and then came splattering down. Many of them even experienced great prosperity as a result of the explosion, feasting on what was left of the cow and the rats and the crew and other higher life forms. Quoth Mandarax, "It is wonderful to see with how little nature will be satisfied." Michael Ayquem de Montaigne, 1533 to 1592. The detonation of dagonite, son of Glaco, direct descendant of noble dynamite, caused a tidal wave in the estuary, which was 6 meters high when it swept the bus off the wharf at the Guayaquil waterfront and drowned Siegfried von Kleist, who wanted to die anyway. More importantly, it snapped the white nylon umbilical cord which tied the future of humankind to the mainland. The wave carried the Bahia de Darwin a kilometer upstream, then left her gently aground on a mud bank in the shallows there. She was illuminated not only by moonlight, but by thick, jazzy fires breaking out all over Guayaquil. The captain arrived on the bridge. He started the twin diesel engines in the darkness far below. He engaged her twin propellers, and the ship slid off the mud bank. She was free. The captain steered downstream toward the open ocean. Quoth Mandarax, "The ship, a fragment detached from the earth, went on lonely and swift like a small planet." Joseph Conrad, 1857 to 1924. And the Bahia de Darwin wasn't just any ship. As far as humanity was concerned, she was the new Noah's Ark. Book 2, And the Thing Became. The Thing became a new white motor ship at night without charts or a compass or running lights, but nonetheless slitting the cold, deep ocean at her maximum velocity. In the opinion of humankind, she no longer existed. The Bahia de Darwin and not the San Mateo, in the opinion of humankind, had been blown to smithereens. She was a ghost ship out of sight of land and carrying the genes of her captain and 7 of her 10 passengers westward on an adventure which has lasted 1 million years so far. I was the ghost of a ghost ship. I am the son of a big-brained science fiction writer whose name was Kilgore Trout. I was a deserter from the United States Marines. I was given political asylum and then citizenship in Sweden, where I became a welder in a shipyard in Malmo. I was painlessly decapitated one day by a falling sheet of steel while working inside the hull of the Bahia de Darwin, at which time I refused to set foot in the blue tunnel leading into the afterlife. It has always been within my power to materialize, but I have done that only once, very early in the game, for a few wet and blustery moments during the storm my ship encountered in the North Atlantic. During our voyage from Malmo to Guayaquil, I appeared in the crow's nest, and one Swedish member of the skeleton crew saw me up there. He had been drinking. My decapitated body was facing the stern, and my arms were upraised. In my hands I was holding my severed head as though it were a basketball. So I was invisible as I stood next to Captain Adolf von Kleist on the bridge of the Bahia de Darwin as we awaited the end of our first night at sea after our hasty departure from Guayaquil. He had been awake all night and was sober now, but had a terrible headache which he had described to Mary Hepburn as, quote, a golden screw between my eyes, end of quote. He had other souvenirs of the previous evening's humiliating debauch, contusions and abrasions from the several falls he had taken while trying to get up on the roof of the bus. He would never have gotten that drunk if he had realized that he was going to be saddled with any responsibilities. He had already explained that to Mary, who had been up all night too, nursing James Wade on the sun deck, abaft of the officers' cabins. Wade had been put up there with Mary's rolled-up blouse for a pillow because the rest of the ship was so dark. At least there was starlight up there after the moon went down. The plan was to move him into a cabin when the sun came up, so he would not fry to death on the bare steel plates. Everybody else was on the boat deck below. Selina McIntosh was in the main saloon using her dog for a pillow, and so were the 6 Cancabono girls. They were using each other for pillows. Hisako was in the head off the main saloon and had fallen asleep all wedged between the toilet and the wash basin. Mandarax, which Mary had turned over to the captain, was in a drawer on the bridge. This was the only drawer on the whole ship with anything in it. It was slightly ajar so that Mandarax had overheard and translated much of what had been said during the night. Thanks to a random setting, it translated everything into Kyrgyz, including the captain's plan of action, which went like this. They would go straight to the Galapagos island of Baltra, where there were docking facilities and an airfield and a small hospital. There was a powerful radio station there, so they would learn for certain what the 2 explosions had been and how the rest of the world might be faring in case a widespread shower of meteorites had taken place, or, as Mary had suggested, World War III had begun. Yes, and this plan might as well have been translated into Kyrgyz or some other language that practically nobody understood, because They were on a course which was going to cause them to miss the Galapagos Islands entirely. His ignorance alone might have been enough to carry the ship far off course, but he compounded his mistakes during the first night before he was sober by changing course again and again in order to steer for the probable impact points in the ocean of shooting stars. His big brain, remember, had him believing that a meteorite shower was going on. Every time he saw a shooting star, he expected it to hit the ocean and cause a tidal wave. So he would steer for it in order to receive the wave on the ship's sharp bow. When the sun came up, he could have been, thanks to his big brain, simply anywhere and headed for simply anywhere.